I'm recording.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second meeting of the Climate Change Comprehensive Plan Amendment Committee for the City of Gig Harbor. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you could please keep your cameras on when we're talking. You don't have to have it on during breaks. This is a public meeting in a sense, since we have a link on our webpage so public can participate. Would anyone like to volunteer as a note taker for this session?
I can do that for you.
Thank you, Bree. And then just as a reminder, you are going to have, and I'll remind you at the end of this session, but all of the CCC PAC participants, I am going to ask you to send two goals or policies that are related to our presentation and discussion today that you could see going into this comp plan amendment that we will be drafting and reviewing in August. So keep that in mind as we move through this whole process, but especially in the weeks after this meeting. Is there anyone who was not at the first meeting who, besides Kelly, of course, who would like to introduce themselves?
Hey, Roxy, this is Matthew, and I'm very glad
Hi.
to introduce myself. I am in Parks Management here at the City of Gig Harbor.
All right, and what motivates your participation in this group?
We have extensive open space goals. I won't say that where we are on them, but I think in terms of open space planning and good environmental practices in our park system would interest me.
Wonderful. Okay, is there anybody else?
Hi there, this is Stina Troyer with Harbor Wild Watch, and we're an education organization here in the harbor. And so climate change is one of the things we talk about when we're educating people, and excited to take part.
Wonderful. No other newbies? All right, moving along. So just as a review of what we're doing here, the CCC PAC is convening to learn about topics related to climate change, including state and regional requirements, as there may be a future requirement to plan for climate change in our comp plan. There isn't one at the moment, but I know that Commerce is piloting this. And then we are going to, based on, the homework that I talked about, providing feedback on goals and policies to get into our comp plan. We'll be drafting a comprehensive plan amendment and reviewing it in August, and then hopefully start the legislative process to adopt said comprehensive plan amendment in September. All right. So this is our proposed timeline. So today we're talking about regional approaches, and we're very lucky to have a wonderful presenter today. We have Kelly McGordy. She is the Director of Transportation Planning with Puget Sound Regional Council, and has worked on a lot of different policy and planning projects throughout the region. I will hand it off to Kelly.
All right, well, thank you so much for inviting me. Roxy, should I go ahead and steal the screen from you and pull up the slides from my end? Okay. It looks like I need you to stop sharing first. Okay. Let's see if we can make this work. All right, is that coming through?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. This is perfect timing. I confess I wasn't entirely sure what you all were hoping to hear from me. So I'm giving you a little bit of a brain dump on all things climate that's here at PSRC. As Roxy said, my name is Kelly McGurdy. I'm the Director of Transportation Planning. I've been here a very long time. And just a little bit about our role. I know a lot about on-road transportation as it relates to climate change. I know nothing about other sectors. So I'm not your girl for talking about energy supply or water issues, but anything related to on-road transportation, I can certainly help you with. So I'm going to really just kind of dive in and share with you kind of what we do and address at PSRC and some of the partnership projects that we're going on, and talking a little bit about the guidance that we're actually working on related to climate change and supporting your comprehensive plan processes. So I would love not just for you to hear from me, but I would love to hear from you about what would be helpful for you, because I am working with partners on guidance, and I'll share a little bit of the time frame for you. So really excited about the timing of this presentation. So first, I just wanted to let you know that when we talk about climate change here at PSRC, we do a number of different things. We kind of have an overarching policy framework, as I'm sure you're aware. Vision 2050 very definitely prioritizes climate, and we'll touch on a little bit about what's in there. The regional transportation plan, we also discuss climate there. Climate change and the reduction of greenhouse gases, as well as other pollutants, is also woven into our project selection process for the federal transportation dollars that we manage. We also do a number of different analyses. We do an environmental impact statement, both for Vision and the RTP at various points in time. We have an adopted 4-part greenhouse gas strategy, which is embedded within our regional transportation plan. But there's some additional layers of analysis that I'll walk through on that. We also, as part of project selection, we have developed a project level emissions tool. It's actually available on our website. So in terms of if you have specific projects that your transportation projects that you're interested in seeing what kind of potential magnitude of emission reduction, we have that tool available as well. And then in terms of partnerships, I'll touch on these a little bit more. We are working on an update to the regional greenhouse gas inventory with a number of jurisdictions. I mentioned we're working on local agency guidance. We are involved in a number of different forums related to zero emission transportation and alternative fuels. And then also related to climate change preparedness and resilience. And I'll touch on each of those a little bit, because I think they will be helpful as you work through your process. So I suspect you all are aware of this, but it's on the slide, so I will review it. So Vision 2050 does have a goal related to climate change. It really does align with the climate goals adopted by the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, as you can see on the screen, but it also calls on us to continue efforts to prepare for the impacts from climate change. There are a number of policies and actions. Vision 2050 includes a lot of sectors, development patterns, housing, utilities, public services, transportation, land use. And as I mentioned, because this is kind of really important, we are mandated and we have a lot of expertise when it comes to on-road transportation, and on-road transportation added as it is influenced by land use decisions. But we need to rely on other partners to dig deeper into all of the other sectors that are out there in Vision. And especially when it comes to climate, climate really touches on a number of different things. So there's a lot of policies and actions throughout the different sectors identified in Vision 2050. We are committed to doing regular analysis and evaluations as part of the 4-year update to our regional transportation plan, which we just adopted a few weeks ago. Vision 2050 also calls on us to develop a climate wedge analysis. And this is where that distinction between the work that we do here at PSRC is one very substantial portion of the overall emissions inventory. When we're talking about a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, transportation, as you all know, is a significant portion of that. But there are other sectors. And so we are committed, and I'll touch a little bit on this again in a moment, in terms of a partnership project we're working on, not just to talk about the inventory, not just to talk about transportation, but what are some of the other sectors and what are some of the other opportunities that might play into actions that local jurisdictions can take to address climate change from some of those other avenues. And then again, Vision 2050 certainly talks about impacts from climate change, as well as building resilient communities. So we have had an adopted 4-part greenhouse gas strategy since 2010. This is embedded in our regional transportation plan. And again, this is really acknowledging when PSRC does our greenhouse gas emissions analysis, we are talking about the impacts from vehicles. But each of these 4 boxes influences the on-road transportation sector. So land use is a big component, and obviously we rely on Vision 2050 and the regional growth strategy. It is a very heavily transit-focused regional growth strategy. We recognize that providing transportation choices is also important to this puzzle. The regional transportation plan lays out a vision of high capacity transit network, active transportation, and really supporting the regional growth strategy and encouraging providing options to get people out of single occupant vehicles. User fees is another important component as it relates to emissions from the transportation sector. The regional transportation plan does recognize that we have some tolling and user fees already in place on certain state highways. We do anticipate a transition to a road usage charge or some kind of fee-based system into the future for 2 reasons. One, because we recognize that it does help to manage demand of the system, but also because, as I think you all are aware, the gas tax is a continuing declining resource for transportation dollars. And then lastly, the last box in the 4-part strategy is technology. We are a growing region. We are a built out region. We are doing everything we possibly can in those other 3 boxes, but we still need to consider the transition to a zero emission transportation system. So the 4-part strategy outlines some of the work related to conversion to electric and other vehicles. So this is, as I mentioned, we've had this in place since 2010. And the regional transportation plan that was just adopted a few weeks ago has more information in each of these sectors in terms of what's in the plan right now and what, looking ahead, do we anticipate coming down the pike. And this is the results from the regional transportation plan, the current regional transportation plan, and our 4-part strategy. It acknowledges over on the left-hand side, if we didn't have vision, if we didn't have the commitment to expanding our high capacity transit network, for example, what would our emissions look like under kind of a business as usual scenario? And it's pretty high. We recognize that there's also just kind of the natural progression of vehicles. We have enhanced fuel economy standards on the books today that will certainly bring us down in terms of overall emissions. And then we have Vision 2050 and the regional transportation plan with those things that I just outlined, the regional growth strategy, the investments of high capacity transit. Over, I think 70% of the capacity investments in the regional transportation plan are designated towards transit. Over half of the total plan is designated to maintenance and preservation. So we certainly need all of those things to continue to move the needle downward. But we are at the same time expecting 1.4 million people coming to the region by 2050. So with all of those things, we can make some significant progress to meet our goals, but it's not enough. And so then the balance, of course, is that transition to a zero emission transportation future. There's a lot more details behind this in the RTP, but we wanted to share with you the information that is available and the information that's provided in the RTP on each of those 4 boxes. So then I wanted to move a little bit into kind of outside of the analysis component and into the partnership project and some of the other interesting work that's going on. The first is the Puget Sound Regional Emissions Analysis Project. So Vision 2050 and the RTP, as I mentioned, we align with the work of the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency related to both the regional emissions inventory and the climate goals that have been established. Right now, the emissions inventory is based on 2015, but we recognize, this is certainly an emerging and evolving work program. So we are working with 7 other partner agencies to update the regional emissions inventory. It's going to be a very comprehensive update. We're trying to spend a little bit more attention on some of the sectors that we've traditionally known less about. So for example, aviation emissions. But we're also, as I mentioned earlier, focus on those wedge analyses and really understanding for each of the sectors, whether we're talking about buildings and energy usage, wastewater, agriculture, or transportation, what are the things on the books today that will drive the reduction of emissions, but also what's driving potentially increases in emissions. And it is primarily population growth in the economy. But what are some of those pathways for further reductions across all wedges? There's also an element of social equity that's built into this project, both in terms of the process and the outreach, but also the outcomes. This project definitely addresses the work called for in Vision 2050. It is anticipated to be done later this year, but I think perhaps of most interest to you is not only is it going to produce a updated regional inventory that's quite comprehensive, it's going to create an inventory for each of our 4 counties individually. Pierce County is at the table, Tacoma is at the table. The project is not going to individual city level, but the intent behind this is somewhat to have regional coordination. So we're all talking from the same playbook. So this updated regional inventory, both at the regional scale and at the county scale, it should be something in the future that individual jurisdictions can rely on and point to, rather than having to expend your own resources doing your own citywide inventory. You are certainly welcome to do that. It could be value add, but in the absence of certain resources, this is something that would be consistent across all 4 counties in the region and could be useful as a really foundational and baseline resources as jurisdictions are looking to understand what is the emissions portfolio and what are some of the things that they can do. Another project that we've been working on with the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency for the last several years is a regional electric vehicle collaboration. We pulled this together again. You're going to hear a consistent theme: regional coordination, having everybody talk from the same playbook. And on this forum, it was really to advance zero emission vehicles throughout the region, particularly electric vehicles. We wanted to provide a forum to provide technical assistance. We wanted to provide a forum to share lessons learned, leverage resources and opportunities. We are really on a precipice for electric vehicles. There is a lot of momentum right now, both in terms of federal funds that are flowing, state actions that have been taken under Move Ahead Washington and other activities, as well as just the industry itself. You know, every day I think I see something from one of the auto manufacturers that they are committing to a transition like this. So it really is unprecedented, the pace at which the transition is happening today versus even what it was happening a few years ago. So we want to make sure that we are getting in front of it, that we're providing information to help local jurisdictions plan for it, do what they need to do with their own community. There are things related to, we don't expect local jurisdictions to fund all of the charging infrastructure, for example, but there might be some things that are necessary related to, for example, new commercial or residential buildings and allowing certain the baseline kind of infrastructure, allowing that to be built so that electric charging stations can be placed there. There are other things that might come into play with the public right of way. So we've had, I think, 5 events so far. This slide is a little out of date. We had one not too long ago, where we're bringing jurisdictions and organizations from various scales together to share best practices. So we've heard from the state, we've heard from the energy program at Washington State University, we've heard from local jurisdictions on some of the things that they've done related to electric vehicles, whether it's updating building codes or updating ordinances or some of the pilot programs they've done. We've heard from utilities and how utilities and jurisdictions are working together. And hearing both in terms of the challenges, but also the opportunities. We also know there's a lot of work going on right now at the state, both for the Department of Commerce as well as Washington State Department of Transportation. So we are working in coordination with them. And we are trying, what right now we're doing is working to develop a clearinghouse. We're going to have a web presence where we can share a lot of the data and best practices. WSDOT and Commerce right now are working on, you may be familiar with House Bill 1287. They are working on a mapping tool and a forecasting tool so that local jurisdictions, one of the big questions we get is, how do we know how much infrastructure is necessary and what is it going to take? And so a lot of that work is being developed right now. So we want to be able to serve as a resource, not to duplicate data, but to maybe help folks find the right data and the right partners that they might need to work with. And to get in front of this, and again, given the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a heavy investment in electric vehicles and zero emission transportation. We think it's probably wise to begin development of a regional electric vehicle and zero emissions plan, so we can help our jurisdictions go pursue some of those grant funding opportunities. And then moving on to resilience, we have another partnership project. And again, Vision 2050 went further on climate preparedness than Vision 2040 had done before. And this is something that at PSRC, through the Regional Transportation Plan, we've done some work on this, but we are in no ways an expert, but we're trying to advance our skills. We did develop a regional hazards web map. So this is, you know, a lot of the counties and a lot of cities have done a lot of great work related to their hazard mitigation plans or through their emergency management departments. But we wanted to at least provide, again, for perhaps agencies who are less resourced or don't have staff available. We pulled together the hazards and the risks that we know about through the region. We put them into a web-based map, along with some other information. So for example, we have, and I'll just make up an example here, a layer related to landslide risk, but we also have layers related to contextual data like our demographic data. Where are higher proportions of people of color or people of low income? We have where our designated centers are. We have layers in there, I think, related to schools. We have the transportation network. So trying to bring in a GIS and an interactive format, folks can zoom into their own area and see what does it appear that their risks are, what are some of the infrastructure nearby, where are the populations nearby. So just a resource, not in any way providing detailed guidance with that tool, but just a resource. But the Puget Sound Climate Preparedness Collaborative, we helped with a few other agencies form this back in 2014. And since then it has grown. We have, I think, over 20 partner agencies right now on board. And again, it's about regional coordination. It's about advancing the topic. So the goal was to, you know, rather than have 100 different jurisdictions doing 100 different things and using different data, having one place to again have a standard way of talking about the topic, agreed upon data sources and other resources, and sharing information and opportunities and leverage with each other. So there is a website, you can see it there. We host lots of different events on a lot of different topics. And I think this is the group that perhaps goes well beyond the PSRC boundaries in terms of our areas of expertise, because there's a lot of on the ground practitioners on a lot of the climate preparedness topics that go well beyond what PSRC works on. So wildfire smoke, we've had topics on wildfire smoke. They get into you know, urban tree canopy, they get into water quality, they get into a lot of different things. So there's a lot of different offshoot opportunities to learn from experts on whatever topic of interest or of concern to a specific jurisdiction. And then lastly, probably, and this might be what you're most interested in, and I'm really interested in hearing from you about, is we know that everyone's working on their comprehensive plans. And there's a number of guidance documents under development right now under Vision 2050. And let me see if I have one more. There we go. So I know that there is a webinar coming up to kind of, I think, introduce the topic. And I don't know if Paul is on the line, but I think that's June 15th. It's kind of the introductory webinar related to the comp plan guidance. I'm tasked with coming up with climate guidance. So I'm working on that right now. And it's going to address both mitigation and opportunities for reducing emissions. And again, primarily from the area that I'm an expert in, which is transportation. But then also I'm working with the collaborative on what kind of guidance can we provide to jurisdictions related to resilience and climate preparedness. So the guidance as we kind of envision it, we're going to summarize what the various policies and actions in Vision 2050 on this topic are. Some of them could require some definitions and clarifications for the average human being and not the average planner. So we're going to try to do that. And we're also pulling together just best practices and examples of how other places have addressed these topics in their comp plans or just in any of their programs or actions. And this is going to be both from jurisdictions within the region as well as across the country. And then to the extent that we can provide useful resources and links, whether that's our own web mapping tools, there's some intriguing state resources available. There's, of course, the municipal MRSC resources. And another layer of effort that we're trying to do is to acknowledge the fact that every jurisdiction is unique. They're different sizes, they're different resources, they have different issues. And so we're going to try to come at this from not a one size fits all approach, but acknowledging there's going to be a range of level of effort. And towards that, let me move my little bar here. We are going to try to tailor the guidance to the extent that we can to that kind of level of effort. And really meeting jurisdictions where they are. And it was pointed out to me from a recent conversation I had, it's not so much based on the size of a jurisdiction or the resources available, but really about what kind of level of effort they feel is important or required for any one of these different policies. And again, the policies, particularly related to resilience, cover so many different topic areas. So we are, first and foremost, related to resilience, we're really encouraging that internal coordination. So making sure that the planners in the Public Works Department really reach out and talk to their emergency management department, for example. There's a lot of resources that we've discovered, even just connecting people within their own organization can be a really valuable tool. Also acknowledging in this guidance document that there isn't an expectation that every jurisdiction is going to address every issue or every policy is going to apply to every concern. And there's also not an expectation that every jurisdiction come up with some complex work program. So we're really trying to keep that message in mind and try to tailor the guidance and encourage jurisdictions to really be thinking about what are the particular needs in your jurisdiction and with your community, providing the tools and the resources to help folks figure that out if they're less far along on these topics than others. And really kind of reminding folks that meaningful impacts can still be accomplished no matter what that level of effort. So we recognize there's going to be a spectrum from jurisdictions who really haven't touched on climate before to jurisdictions who have really detailed and comprehensive work programs. And there's going to be space to make improvements at all of those levels of effort. I think this is my last slide, and then I'll just kind of see what your reaction is to all of this. The goal is to complete this guidance by late July or early August. We are hoping to host a workshop. I said July here, but it might eke into early August. And it'll be, I'm still working on who else we can provide. So I would love your feedback on what resources and what assistance might be most beneficial. I mentioned that there's another webinar coming up on June 15th. I think they're calling it Passport to 20 something, passport to something. I know that I think they were planning on having a webinar related to, or guidance webinar related to housing and some of the other topics as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Hopefully that was at least marginally useful to all of you. And I'm happy to, I would love your feedback. And really the question I have for you is how can we be helpful?
Thank you so much, Kelly. I had a question about when you're thinking about, kind of a smaller city like Gig Harbor, which has limited staff resources and time, where do you think you get the most effective regional collaboration, like kind of under what kind of topic umbrella?
I'm not sure how best to answer that particular question, but maybe I'll try to use an example. So for a smaller jurisdiction that maybe doesn't have the resources and doesn't already have kind of a baseline work program, one example, I'll kind of give an example both for emissions reduction as well as resilience. So I mentioned on emissions, we're working on an emissions inventory project. I know a lot of jurisdictions, and you may be one of them, so apologies if I've forgotten that, but a lot of jurisdictions have an interest in doing their own inventory. And that can be, I know many folks hire consultants for that. We get a lot of calls. We support that work. We provide some of the transportation data and the emission factor. But one option that we're going to be laying out in the guidance is that's great if you choose to do that. And if you think that's really important to get a really good handle on what's going on in your community and do an emissions inventory. But if you don't have the resources to do that, or you don't want to do that, that's okay, because you can still point to and utilize the regional emissions inventory or your county's emissions inventory as kind of that reference point. And then you can still talk about the various ways that the options and alternatives for reducing emissions across a number of sectors, they will still apply. And there's still opportunities then for that small jurisdiction to refer to that larger scale county or regional inventory and say, these are the areas that really pertain to my jurisdiction. And here are some opportunities that we can do to actually reduce emissions. So it's that kind of example of a spectrum of, if you want to spend a lot of resources and get really granular data, more power to you, but you can still do something that can be impactful. On the resilience side and the preparedness side, kind of similar. Some jurisdictions will choose to invest in a lot of detailed GIS tools, for example, to really understand some of the particular hazards or risks in their area, really dig into certain topics. But if you don't have those resources or you don't wish to, there are still other kind of baseline things you can start with. I mentioned that we provided a hazards risk map. There's a lot of resources at the state. There's actually, the Department of Natural Resources has developed or is developing a tool that can also help. So you could point to and kind of understand, in my community, maybe my biggest concerns is maybe it's flooding, or maybe it's landslides, or maybe it's, what have you, or maybe it's the risk of extreme temperatures on my population. You don't necessarily need to do that expensive detailed inventory analysis, which I don't want to discount. I think that's still great. But even just having a basic understanding of what are your overall risk factors and tying that to your community, what you know about your community members, your population groups, where your concentrations of elderly or people with limited English proficiency, for example. And then you can start to build that framework of what are some things that we can do to address those risks and prepare our community. So there's, again, that spectrum. And I'm not trying to downplay that greater expenditure of resources and greater granularity, because we all learn from jurisdictions that do that. But we're trying to set this up so that there's still some more perhaps qualitative efforts that can still be impactful. And it's really about helping jurisdictions understand, kind of connecting the dots between these are the risks, this is what you know about your community, and you know that better than anybody else, connecting those two, and then starting to build some options for improvement. I don't know if that got to your question.
No, that's helpful. Just knowing that, you don't always have to reinvent the wheel, and to partner with folks with more resources or who are doing the same things as you. Thank you. It looks like we have a couple questions from council members.
We're just members. Oh, am I on? Okay. So I had a question. Back to emissions inventory and collaboration and partnering. Maybe two questions. One is, do you think somebody, and I'm not sure who that somebody is, at least in Pierce County, are they going to serve as a kind of a clearinghouse holder of the data, so that, let's say a city does, or let's say a city goes out and hires a consultant and actually does an emissions inventory on, say, 150,000 square foot manufacturing building, and then they get a number of value. Is that going to be somehow kept somewhere so that another city that couldn't afford to hire a consultant could say, oh gosh, there's 100, and, you know, I see data for a 150,000 square foot building. Maybe we can use that and scale it up or down. Is there going to be a clearinghouse or keeper of the data or something like that?
That's a great question. And that to that level of granularity, we haven't had that discussion, but I will tell you that the partnership project on the emissions inventory, it's being led by King County, and it's partnered with us and the Clean Air Agency. I think all 4 counties are represented in some of the cities. We hadn't talked about that level of detail where it gets down to examples of you know, like as you're saying, the example of this type of manufacturing facility, but I think that's actually a really great idea. What we have talked about is having this, having the inventory, and there's going to be a bit of an interactive tool for the wedges moving forward. That's going to be available either on King County's website or the Clean Air Agency's website. And there's already talk about how can we both share this broadly with all of the jurisdictions, but then have a way to update it. So I really like that idea that you just kind of floated, as there's a bit of, this is a bit more of a higher level inventory, but for specific kind of sub projects, I think that having that stable of examples and best practices is really helpful. So I will, with your permission, I will take that back to the partnership group and talk about that kind of for phase 2.
Well, I have a small copyright fee, but wait.
Am I up, Roxy? Thank you. Kelly, thanks so much for being here today. Thanks for the presentation. Gig Harbor, of course, is a small city. We're a bit of a bedroom community. So gas emissions are someplace that we certainly need to cut down. We have, our downtown is in a basin. So once you get downtown, you have hills to climb. Any way to get out of downtown. And while we are trying to put in more sidewalks and make things more attractive to bike and to walk, we need to do something about gas emissions. And working with Pierce County, we need to find a better way, I think, to work with Pierce County Transit. Our last conversation with them pretty much was that they were going to be spending all their dollars over in the Puyallup area, because that's where the majority and that's where they think the need is. So I'd like to know how small cities, is there some program, since this is about transportation, is there some program that small cities can do or take advantage of to get some sort of funding or even best practices, following up on Roger's idea there of what other small cities are doing, to find out how small cities that don't have the ability for our own bus system, what we can do. Do you have any ideas on how we can go forward?
That's also a great question. And I have to confess, I don't know that I have a great idea in terms of a solution set. And because I recognize, you know, fundamentally you have to work with your transit agency. And we know that not every transit agency is resourced in the same way. But that's helpful for our guidance document, is that we can potentially look up some examples of communities that have a similar issue, but they've worked with either the transit agency or some other partner to develop kind of the non-traditional transit service, whether that's community shuttles or something of that nature. I know that some of the rural areas, the rural communities in King County have that same problem, that they've don't necessarily have the demand, and it wouldn't be necessarily cost effective for a fixed route transit service, but there are other options that they've been working with through both King County Metro, but also we have access and connections to a number. There's so many different community-based organizations that provide transportation services. So that's something that we can start to build some best practices, include in the guidance in terms of on the mitigation side. In terms of the funding, and I mean, it all somewhat comes down to funding. So we can also kind of identify some of the, how some of those shuttle services have been funded. I know that there's certainly the Federal Transit Administration, there's some of the state mobility grants. So we can we'll try to build some of that information into the guidance document.
That would be great. Very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, Barbara Ann, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it looks like a lot of the recommendations you've got are around reducing emissions from existing, vehicle patterns or traffic. Are you also working on guidance that for planning that would reduce either the length or the number of trips?
Yeah, absolutely. So our 4-part strategy, as I mentioned, and again, this is just as it relates to transportation. There's a whole slew of other actions related to other sectors, but our 4-part strategy really the guidance will talk about the opportunities from transit to reduce emissions. It's to eliminate trips. It's to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and that could be through making trips shorter. And it's also looking at cleaner vehicles. So I think all 3 of those, so getting people completely out of their cars into another mode, reducing the trip distance and the overall vehicle miles traveled, and then for those vehicles that are remaining on the road, making them as clean as possible.
Okay.
And Kyla.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to share, since we were talking about, different transportation options, that the WSU Green Transportation team also has a wealth of resources for transportation, different funding resources potentially, or different ideas for how we can, address transportation needs and reduce emissions. So they host webinars and different kind of groups that you can attend that way as well. I was also just, I think it would be great to connect with other small jurisdictions that face kind of similar challenges. As Kelly mentioned, there's some in King County that have had, similar issues where, they're not getting prioritization from their transit service. And I think that would be an interesting topic for staff to discuss at the Pierce County Sustainability 2030 Collaborative that we have Gig Harbor staff attend. And we've talked quite a bit already about electric vehicles and electrification of transportation, but that's also a place where Gig Harbor staff can connect with staff at other, local cities, towns, and tribes within Pierce County and talk about Pierce County issues specifically. So I think that'll be a great resource as well for thinking about, how would we integrate these, either comp plan actions or goals, but also just generally address some of the transportation issues that we're facing.
Thank you, Kyla. Carl, sorry if I cut you off earlier. Excuse me.
Oh, no, you didn't. I didn't notice wasn't sure if you saw the hand up. So I was just jumping in to keep the conversation rolling. Kelly, I had a quick question. In your presentation, so with the regional emissions inventory, you had mentioned that there were 7 regional partner agencies. Did you list those? If you did, I'm sorry, but could you, if you wouldn't mind listing?
Yeah. So it's definitely the 4 counties. So all 4 counties are represented. Puget Sound Regional Council, Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and I believe City of Seattle is the 7th one. I don't think that there are any other cities on there, but I know, so King County is leading it. So there's more detail available on each of the cities in King County, and then the other 3 counties, there'll be a county level inventory. And we of course have an interest in the regional, but I think the tools that are going to come out in terms of how jurisdictions can look at kind of forward thinking, what are the actions and regulations on the books already that will lead to emission reductions. But then there's a tool that's being developed where you can kind of move the lever to see what kind of, whether you're talking about and it covers all of the sectors. So there's some tools that you can move the lever to see if you do this much effort, what is your ultimate emission reduction? And we've been, I had this conversation because I won't name the jurisdiction, but as I mentioned earlier, a lot of jurisdictions want to update their emissions inventory every few years. There's a lot of resources that they expend. And when it comes to climate emissions, it's not like 2 years is going to change that much. And so we've been trying to kind of slowly encourage them. There's real value in having all of the jurisdictions in the region and all of the counties kind of use that same, like, this is our baseline regional information. And there's some granularity, but I think that to the extent that folks can, one, save themselves some resources, but really use that same benchmark. And then moving forward, we're all kind of talking from the same page. So we're trying to have a bit of a conversation as long as it's going to be value add and making sense, so that maybe save everyone some effort, use this kind of tool, and then collectively we can update it again at the appropriate time, whether that's 3 to 5 years out. I went on a little bit of riff there for your original question.
No, that's okay. Thank you. That's all really great information. And yeah, and I really appreciate the idea of, finding sort of commonality, finding that benchmark that we can all sort of work from. I think that's probably, I'm speaking for everybody here, and I shouldn't be, but I'm going to. I think we're all kind of scrambling for that, right? Especially smaller jurisdictions kind of looking for, okay, where do we start, and what is the, what is this, the measure that we're using, and what is the goal? That's kind of what we're hopefully all trying to get to. I wanted to note really quick, and then I'll get off the pulpit, but that workshop that Puget Sound Regional Council is putting on is Passport to 2024.
Thank you.
So thank you for mentioning that, and we will be in attendance there. And then thank you. The last statement you made in your presentation, I just really liked, and I wanted to emphasize it for the group, and maybe something that we can all kind of grab onto. But meaningful impacts can be accomplished at all levels. I think that's just a really great statement, and I think it at least spoke to me, from our little community here in the harbor. So I don't know, I just made a note of that. I thought it was interesting. So
Good.
Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, we have Paul and then Robert.
Great, thank you. Kelly, kind of a follow-up, I believe, to Councilman Wilk's question or comments on resources. This year with the latest transportation package, I think it was Move Ahead Washington that was passed, like 16, close to $17 billion. Is there how do we tap into that? Or are there any avenues as a local jurisdiction to be able to utilize some of the funding for transportation at the local level?
Absolutely. So we're spending a lot of time focused on the federal package in terms of unpacking all of the grant opportunities, understanding what's available that will be managed by our federal partners. We're still going through over the next few months, understanding how much of those funds will flow through PSRC. And we're hoping to start to build some resources that we can share with our member jurisdictions in terms of what are the resources out there? What are some of the deadlines? We have a lot of data at our disposal at PSRC that might be helpful to jurisdictions to go pursue that. We hadn't focused as much on Move Ahead Washington, but I think it would be important for us to, if we're going to start provide those resources for the federal act, also maybe provide some summary information related to the state funding as well. To be honest, it's not something that we've gotten as involved in, but we are certainly in a position to do so. And we do have a relationship with the State Department of Transportation and particularly their local programs office. So a lot of the funds that local jurisdictions would be pursuing would be funneled at some way through the State Department of Transportation. So I will add that to my list of some resources that we might be able to provide in terms of just understanding what's out there. Because there's, be careful what you wish for, because there's a lot of money that's out there and flowing.
Just to comment on that, Paul, I think some of that money is probably funneling through the Transportation Coordinating Committee at the county level. And they've just sort of formalized their framework for doling out those funds this year and how it's going to be competed for. And I think that's at, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe Councilmember Wu could speak to it too, but I think either at the last PCRC meeting or maybe it's the upcoming PCRC meeting, they're going to be, actually it's the upcoming meeting. I'm sorry, it is the upcoming meeting. They're going to be talking about that. So yeah, so
and that is, just to interrupt there, that is actually the PSRC funding process that so it's a portion, it's an important portion, but those are the funds that we know that we're managing. But then there's additional funding even on top of that. So it's a really good reminder to me that there is still a role that we can play to provide some helpful resources.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Robert?
Yeah, thank you. Kelly, I wanted to say I really totally agree with your conversation about being able to get plenty of good information from the general emissions inventories that have been done already. I thought about this quite a lot, and I think the answers are for a small community of our size are already out there somewhere, and we just don't need to spend much time, if any, trying to go do a detailed baseline inventory of greenhouse gases in our city. There's plenty of folks that dive pretty deeply into that. Transportation buildings, there's 4 or 5 things that need to be hit, and we know what probably would work for those. And so I really think that's the right approach. You didn't mention much about land use in terms of the regional transportation, but I think those are pretty closely tied together, and they probably lend themselves to discussion in a comprehensive plan about climate as well.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that my colleague, Paul Ingram, who's the Director of Growth Management, is on the line. So my job relates to on-road transportation as it's influenced and at how we support the regional growth strategy. And our guidance is going to talk about that connection. But then there's another group of guidance. I think, Paul, maybe you can talk about some of the guidance that's being done on the kind of more strict land use side as opposed to the transportation connection.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, and glad to meet all of you. I'm Paul Ingram, the Director of Growth Management, and I was just kind of sitting in the background because Kelly was doing a fabulous job. I thought I was going to get off scot-free and not have to answer any questions. But you're absolutely right. There's these multiple different aspects that either have an influence on climate change or respond in a resilience aspect, including the land use pattern, the housing choices, some of the other things beyond transportation. And so it's a great opportunity to the extent of your capacity. And by capacity, it's both staff capacity, it's also, you know, your public's capacity to engage, your capacity in updating the comprehensive plan, but to be able to look at your land use aspects, your housing aspects, ways the question was raised earlier as to like, how can trips be shortened? That's a great one. Are there opportunities to maybe look in the future as to how blocks can become cut up maybe in a way that allow for trips to be shorter or where people could walk to some places? I don't think an expectation that trips vanish completely, but there's that effort as to as we build our community, can we do it in a way that allows for some of those trips to convert to other modes or to become shorter, as well as, and I don't know if you've talked about this at all, Kelly, we think a lot about how to remove emissions from the transportation network, but there's also some guidance out there about buildings, how buildings can be more efficient, different things that can be done within as we construct our urban environments, how we can reduce energy consumption and greenhouse gases from that urban environment as well.
I started the presentation as I like to start all of my presentations, pointing out the things that I don't know. And as I mentioned, we're not experts in all of that, but it's certainly, we are going to, within these guidance documents, we're certainly going to lean heavily into the resources that we have and the knowledge that we have that we can share. but also acknowledging things like there's a lot of work related to energy efficiency and power supply and agriculture and all sorts of things that we're not experts in, but we are going to do our best to point you into other resources such as MRSC or Commerce or other parts of the country where you can at least we don't want to leave you hanging, so at least help you provide some of that information. And just to kind of close that particular, when we think about land use, we often think about buildings, but one of the first resilience policies and vision that I'm tackling in terms of the guidance has to do with tree canopy. And it was really interesting research for me to be able to, as we're developing the guidance, explain what the connection is and explain that spectrum of there's some kind of simple approaches that folks can take to address that impact climate and health versus the really detailed. And so that's another example of how decisions made on even outside of buildings, but things like where you plant street trees can have an impact.
Wonderful. Georgina? And we're going to take a break after Kyla's question.
Hi, thank you, Kelly. This was really informative. I lived for a while in Thurston County, and I don't know if you're familiar with their climate action plan. It's a county-wide plan, and the cities of Lacey and Olympia and Tumwater, all the councils voted to join that plan, and as did the Thurston County Council. And I was wondering if you are familiar with that plan. I know they voted for it in 2020, so they've had a little bit of time under their belt now. And I was wondering how that was going and there are a lot of small communities in, excuse me, in Thurston County that have been, are under the umbrella of this plan. So I was just wondering how it was going there for these smaller communities.
I'm familiar with the plan, but I'm not as familiar with the details. But that is another thing that it's a great suggestion that we can look to provide some guidance information, and I can reach out to our partners. Sorry, I keep moving my eye because the boxes of where you are keep moving on me. We can reach out to our partners down in Thurston County and ask some of those questions and maybe provide some more information, specifically as it's relating to the smaller communities.
Right, thank you.
All right, and Kyla.
Yeah, I was curious if Kelly or Paul, if you know a little bit more, could share with the group about how land use is being included in the regional greenhouse gas inventory update. Because my understanding is that the 2019 greenhouse gas inventory has a new kind of protocol that's being followed that's different from 2015 that really emphasizes land use more than our previous regional inventory.
Sure. So it's being included in a couple of different ways, because every time folks do these regional inventories, they come to PSRC for information related to transportation in particular and VMT, as well as our forecast. So how the land use strategy is affecting transportation, that's kind of one place that it's being incorporated. So the base year information is just the base year information. But when I talked about that forecasting and the wedge analysis looking forward, the inventory is using our Vision 2050 regional growth strategy as the assumed on the books information related to land use patterns. And then, as I mentioned, they're also providing some tools where if counties or jurisdictions want to turn that dial even further, they'll be able to do that and see how much additional impact there would be. But yeah, the regional growth strategy and the Vision 2050 principles are being built into that inventory.
The one thing I would just add is it's important as you do planning and looking at a land use as part of that inventory is the difference between your existing built environment and what will be built in the future. It's really hard to change your existing built environment. So that existing built environment may contribute certain amount of your greenhouse gas emissions. Retrofitting that might be more challenging than what you can do to alter the direction of some of the new development that might be happening. So just, I think it's useful to think of as new development occurs, you might have a really great opportunity to think of, well, if we can make some adjustments to how that development occurs in ways that might reduce greenhouse gas emissions or be more resilient or both. There are some great opportunities there, but those strategies might be different than the strategies for your existing built environment.
Thank you, Paul and Kelly. So with that, it's 3:02. So I appreciate all the questions. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then I hope everyone can come back to have continue the discussion about regional approaches and collaboration. So let's take a quick break, and I will see you all at 3:07. Thanks. Keep moving. Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you, Cindy. All right. So now that we're back, I just have like some, a very simple, let's see, discussion question for y'all. Can you all see that? All right. Oops. Oh my goodness. Here. Oh my goodness. So sorry. So yeah, we've been talking about regional planning. I wanted to hear from all of you, how can regional partnerships and approaches strengthen our work as we move toward this comp plan amendment and, future climate related policies and plans? And if this question doesn't resonate with you and you have more questions for Kelly, go for it. But yeah, just jump in or raise your hand and I can call on you.
Well, let's not reinvent the wheel. If somebody's doing something and they're successful at it, let's see what we can learn from that.
Yeah, I can almost guarantee also that Pierce County has probably done or is planning to do their own greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So, and it seems like you could probably get most of the information you would need from that. But I should probably check in with, where did she go? Because we have somebody here who's with our sustainable, yeah, Kyla.
Right.
Yeah, so as Kelly mentioned, Pierce County is one of the counties that will be receiving a greenhouse gas inventory very shortly through this regional effort. So we will have a greenhouse gas inventory that is particular just to Pierce County and how our emissions, or what our emissions look like in 2019. And yeah, I think as it's kind of been mentioned, that it should be super helpful to Gig Harbor. And I mean, your emissions as a city would be much smaller than our countywide emissions. And the distribution might be a little bit different, but overall, as Kelly's talking about that wedge diagram and like where the levers are, where we can really make big changes and impacts on our greenhouse gas emissions, those are pretty much the same, across communities.
I'm glad we have so many Pierce County folks in this group. Roger, do you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I'm trying to answer the question. As long as whoever's done it can get the data stored in such a way, make it easily accessible to other folks, even though, we clearly haven't paid for it, at least, well, maybe not directly, but since we are Pierce County residents, we also pay taxes. But I think the thing is to try to get the data out there and in such a way that smaller cities who don't have a lot of staff time and maybe even a staff time or understanding of a lot of this stuff, because this is new for a lot of us. I mean, greenhouse gas, we weren't thinking about this 15 years ago, and a lot of us never had that kind of education. So get it out in a way that it's usable, I think would be very valuable, because it's a force multiplier if we could do that. Because again, Gig Harbor, resource-wise, we don't have a whole lot of people working on this, and we've got a pretty aggressive schedule. So whatever we can use that somebody else has done that go along their path that's already been hacked through the weeds, it really means a lot to us. I mean, And again, this is a combined team effort. So the more we can help each other, we'll probably do some stuff that other folks may want to use. So it's contingent upon us when we do things. If we've got good data, to somehow get it to a clearinghouse in a way that's easily usable by somebody else, maybe a smaller city.
Is there any way that are cities in a position to be able to sign on to the inventory you're planning to do? Is that something we can do cooperatively? Or is that something we need to ask about?
Well, I
'Cause
think
it's not going to be an issue just for Gig Harbor. It's going to be an issue for everybody. So if there were a way that you could have one inventory done for the county, and maybe, you know, Gig Harbor pitches in a little bit, City of DuPont pitches in a little bit, or whatever it is, so it's more comprehensive.
sure. So the state of the project right now, it's probably too late for that, but the countywide inventory will encompass all of the cities within the county. I think when you go through an update process, if jurisdictions are interested in having that more granular city by city approach, I think that's certainly on the table for whenever we do an update. But I still think there's value, even if each city doesn't have their own, like this is our piece of the pie, still having, I think someone else said it earlier, still being able to say, we are referencing and we are part of this countywide inventory, and here are the things that we know that will help to reduce emissions. I still think that that's going to be quite valuable. But yeah, I'll make a note with our partners that depending on where we go in terms of an update, you'll be able to see from this effort what it looks like for each of the King County cities and what that looks like for them. And if that's something that you're interested in Pierce County, we can have that conversation for a future project.
Actually, would you mind just explaining the inventory? I've got this picture in my head of the inventory looking at the land uses, the existing land uses, or maybe even the predicted land uses in an area, and doing a calculation of the prospective emissions from those, from that point of view. Is that accurate, or how is that done?
Sure. Well, I'm just one cog in this big wheel. So let me start by saying that. So we are looking at first and foremost, we're looking at the baseline emissions from all of the different sectors. And when it comes to land use, it's primarily the energy usage from buildings. And then from the transportation perspective, it's the impact on vehicle emissions and activity from the decisions made about the location of land use. And then for the forecast, doing that wedge analysis, it's again looking at the distribution patterns and how that, apologies, my dog is barking, the distribution patterns, and again, that impact on transportation. So I don't think it's to the extent as the example that you just described. It's a little bit higher sector level than that. Yeah, and I think in my slide deck I provided, if I didn't, I can send this, Roxanne, to you. The partnership project actually has a flyer, and that might be helpful. I can share that so you can see kind of the overview of what's incorporated.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely not.
Carl, you had a question? And then Kyla.
Yeah, Kelly, when you send that out, would you mind copying me on that too? Because I know Roxy's going to be out of the office for a little while, so we'll make sure that we get it and get it out to the group. And sorry, I know you probably covered this again in your presentation, and I might have missed it. But what is the timing of that inventory? Did I see December 2022 as the end date, or what is that? Is that still kind of on target, or what's that look like?
It is. The consultant team has already done quite a bit. And without getting really wonky here, there's a number of different pieces to the inventory. There's kind of the traditional emissions inventory as we normally see it, which is kind of the geographic based. They're also working on a consumption based inventory, which kind of is a little bit more life cycle. And then they're also working on the wedge analysis. So much of the work has already been done. I know they're going to also be doing an outreach component. So I'll try to make sure find out who's on that outreach list. But I believe at some point they are going to be sharing this information broadly and having folks such as yourself being able to see the outcome. But it is on track. I believe that they're already well on their way. So I think December is still the right time frame.
All right, Kyla.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, for sharing information about the inventory process. And if you have more questions about like what Pierce County's inventory is going to look like, you can definitely send those questions to me. So my teammate, Rachel, she goes to those meetings, she's part of the partnership. And so we're very involved in this process of what the inventory, what we're going to get out of the inventory. And we already have some kind of draft data on the 2019 inventory. So thinking about it as like a pie chart, where do all our emissions come from? We've got some data on that already. And my understanding, Kelly, is actually that we will get some of that like initial materials a lot sooner than December. But I think the very end of the project, all of the deliverables might take till the end of the year, but I think we'll have information to share a little bit sooner on where our emissions are coming from. So that data should be available pretty soon, actually, probably this summer. And we'll have a sense of where all the emissions across the entire county are coming from. So how much is it from buildings? How much is it from transportation? How much of it is loss of tree cover? And things like that. And it breaks it down into, is it industrial built environment versus residential versus commercial buildings. And we get that snapshot of what all of the emissions for 2019 looked like, which, may be different today if we think about like how things have changed due to COVID. Maybe your transportation emissions look really different, but 2019 gives us a good baseline of what was normal, right? And I think it's a good kind of perspective on like, well, if things have changed since then, we don't want to go back to what things were like in 2019. And it also kind of helps us see how things have changed since 2015, which was the last time we got this data. So we can see how our emissions have increased and where over the last 4 years, which is not the direction we want to be moving in for reducing our emissions. So all that will be available soon, and we will definitely share that information out as the county team with the public and with all the cities and towns and tribes. So look forward to that. And then also, I just wanted to tack on to Roxy's discussion question. There were some really good points raised about not reinventing the wheel, and that's why we should work with our neighbors. I just wanted to add, we have these jurisdictional boundaries, but most of the things about our lives and the way we experience the world don't have those boundaries, and emissions don't have those boundaries. So it is really helpful to work with our neighbors because their emissions affect our lives, our emissions affect their lives, and all of our systems are interconnected, regardless of where that jurisdictional boundary lies. So I think that's a really important reason for working together and collaborating, especially thinking about Gig Harbor. And Gig Harbor is a small city, but most of your, think about people who consider themselves living in Gig Harbor. Maybe they live in actually unincorporated county, but like that line is so blurred, right? With like what you consider where you live and like who's in your community. So I think that is, really important too for thinking about how we partner between the county and the city for folks who live along that border and, just outside of the city.
Thank you, Kyla. Crystal, did you have a question or comment?
Just a quick comment following up on what Kyla just shared. If people are eager to see what the breakdown of emissions look like, the 2015 data is posted on the Open Pierce County website, and you can see the pie chart with the distribution. And I'm sure it hasn't changed dramatically in 4 years. So if you just Google Open Pierce County, you'll be able to find it.
I was just going to say, I wanted to add that you're right. There's not a lot of difference between 2015 and 2019. The project is going a little bit further back in time. And one of, I think, the intriguing aspects of the project is they are identifying and kind of acknowledging the trends and what's impacting, like why, what is causing emissions to increase. And a good chunk of that, as I mentioned earlier, is population growth and the economic growth, and what is causing emissions to decline. And there's some information about some of the trends there. I think all of that information is going to be really helpful to all the jurisdictions as you kind of look into the future.
Great. All right, let's hear from Roger, and then I'd love to hear from some folks who haven't had a chance to speak up and offer what they believe is important about regional partnerships as of yet.
Thanks. Real quick question for Kyla on the regional greenhouse gas inventory. I know you were talking about wedges and things like, okay, how many tons or metric tons of carbon dioxide have been emitted. Within the data, can a city then parse out, okay, the assumption was per vehicle mile traveled, given a standard car, it's 5 pounds of CO2 per mile. That way the city then could take their own data and then generate their own greenhouse gas inventory? Or are the data just, we think that all the vehicles traveled over in 2019 emitted 50 million metric tons of carbon dioxide?
So in the final report that we get from the consultant who's working on this project, we will get a list of all of the assumptions that they made when creating their calculations. There's also some really great tools out there that EPA publishes on just, kind of basic calculations. If you want to take, the average miles per gallon of a car and calculate, how much gas, what are the carbon emissions associated with burning that much gas if it travels a certain distance. So there's lots of calculator tools available for doing that kind of thing. If you wanted to take the time to kind of build your own inventory based on some of those assumptions. But I think, a lot of that work will have been done through the geographic greenhouse gas emission inventory we'll get for all of Pierce County. I guess it might be difficult to parse out, what amount of this is just coming from Gig Harbor. I think that would be really tricky to try and pull out. But we can see when we get the results out. What might
so
be
I can jump in here because we do this a lot. So the transportation data comes from PSRC, and we have information on basically every car in the region. We have the age of the vehicle fleet. We have information through our travel model about where all this travel is going and to what levels. And so we use the EPA's emissions software to calculate every vehicle trip, at what speed they're traveling. There's a whole emissions profile, and all of that data is woven into this emissions inventory project. As I mentioned, a lot of jurisdictions do want to do their own inventory. And so they usually come to us and they'll ask us both for the travel data within their jurisdiction, but then we can also, there's a couple of different ways we can come at it. We can provide you kind of that emission profile for the vehicle fleet, because depending on the speed that they're traveling, it's going to be looking a little differently. We can certainly do an aggregate. So depending on what each jurisdiction wishes, we've come up with an approach where it can either be just a percentage of the county total. That's kind of the simplest, based on what proportion of travel is within your jurisdiction, or we can come up with something a little bit more granular. But kind of per our original conversation, it's a level of effort that can certainly be done. But after a while, it's kind of assumption 1 upon assumption 2 upon assumption 3. So that's kind of why we're trying to direct folks to, unless there's some questions you're really trying to answer about your own portfolio, really relying on this regional or countywide inventory is probably a really great place to land. And but yeah, we can, if it's something you're interested in, and I think we might have even done it for Gig Harbor in the past, but I don't know that there's a lot of data points behind all that. So I don't know if the project is going to be able to publish all of them, but if you're interested, we can certainly come up with some of that information for you.
Thanks.
Yeah, it sounds like between PSRC and Pierce County, there's a lot of regional data we can lean on. So I am still interested in hearing what y'all think about how regional partnerships and approaches can strengthen our work. Has anyone had some time to noodle on that? And how do you see this fitting into our comprehensive plan amendment? Yes, Barbara, you had a thought.
So one of the things that I'm thinking about is that when I first started working on watershed related stuff in the Gig Harbor community area, we received a report on the demographics of the area that was prepared by Peninsula Light. And then about 10 years ago, they did it again, and the demographics had definitely changed. But things have changed since then again. So I was wondering if you could get trend data that sort of lets you know how the Gig Harbor area responds to sort of some of the bigger regional shifts, like that are related to housing costs and economic shifts. One of the things that I know is that the last time I saw it, about 30% of the workforce in Pierce County drives, if they drive someplace, they're driving up to King County. So dealing with this on a regional scale, I don't think we can't avoid it. We really need to do that. So, but understanding what the region looks like and how it impacts this area. There's also been a lot of resources added. You've got shopping resources and medical resources you didn't have in this area 10 years ago. So what has that changed? So
that is a really good point about income. UN published a report about the relationship between income and greenhouse gas emissions, and usually the higher someone's income, and a high income on a global scale is I believe around $50,000 or $60,000 a year. I mean, that is pretty much 90% of the global people at that income scale account for about 90% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah. So that is a really good thought to consider, how the demographics and economics have changed and how that might have shifted our greenhouse gas output based on consumer spending and access to travel, like air travel.
Yeah. So I mean, a snapshot would be nice, but understanding sort of how it could shift based on what's going on, that would be helpful too.
Yeah. So we have some folks that work with water and stormwater and harbors that we haven't heard from today. I was hoping to maybe get some feedback from y'all on how you see us working regionally with something like water that really doesn't care about jurisdictional boundaries.
Yeah, this is Crystal. I was thinking more just in terms of the presentation around transportation. That's why I didn't have a whole lot to add, but there is a big impact of transportation vehicles from leaks and accidents, as well as from tire dust that all ends up in stormwater and in our creeks and streams and in Puget Sound. So it's not a climate change issue necessarily, but it is another like side effect of our heavy reliance on single occupancy vehicles. So the more we can do to, I guess, reduce that, the better. It would be better for stormwater as well too, as in addition to greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I was trying to pick on Stina and Bree in particular.
Well, I'll jump
if you couldn't tell by my mention of harbor and stormwater.
I work for the stormwater, so that's where I got my attention.
Yeah.
I'll jump in a little bit here because I mean, it's been said here before, only jurisdictions are concerned about jurisdictional boundaries when it comes to something like this. The natural environment, the pollutants, the general public, they ignore jurisdictional boundaries. We, as every buddy who lives out on these peninsulas gets their water, drinking water from the aquifers, from groundwater aquifers. Those are all intertied. I mean, when you look at the aquifer model, Gig Harbor's water comes mostly from the Kitsap Peninsula and towards the Olympic Mountains. So if that doesn't cross jurisdictional boundaries and you know, person way across the county can, in different counties, can affect us here. I don't know how else, but a little more closely tied to our region is just general stormwater runoff. You look at how the county, unincorporated Pierce County, Kitsap County tie together with the city of Gig Harbor. There's a lot of connections there. So and then all of that discharges into Carr Inlet, Gig Harbor Bay, you know, the Narrows, everything, everywhere where we touch. So yeah, it's something that I think that everything that we do, whether it's breathing, pulling water out of the ground, putting water back into the ground or down into the sewer system, it all interties and it all crosses jurisdictional boundaries, regardless of what it is.
That's a good point, Jeff. Stina, you're unmuting. We're going to hear from you.
I would just echo both Jeff and Crystal there. Also, just like the permeable pavement issue of transportation, where that stormwater runoff isn't being filtered out. And so kind of thinking of our wetland areas and those riparian zones as that nice little buffer between our roadways and the Puget Sound. But yeah, feeling excited, like I'm learning a lot here, a little out of my element in this in the transportation kind of city planning crew, but definitely I think the environment and that stormwater pollution, especially the tire dust, having gone to the Salish Sea Ecosystem Conference recently, there was a lot of good research about how harmful that tire dust is to things like salmon. And so we do have all sorts of iconic species in this area. And would just add that it's also international borders because the Puget Sound is part of the Salish Sea, which extends up into Canada. And also just Kyla with the emissions don't have a bot, like it's all connected. And so excited to be part of this conversation and figuring out how we can all work together to do better, because I hate to say it, but I love to say it. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Thank you. Bree, any comments?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
Unless you're trying to pull something out of me that I don't know.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I just
That's okay.
Hadn't heard from you yet in this meeting. Also haven't heard from Matt or John. Kyla.
Yeah, I just wanted to draw this kind of connection line too, so we were talking a little bit about other ecological impacts of transportation and stormwater. And I think we all often think of like, oh, like reducing those other pollutions, that's a side benefit, also great for ecological function. But to bring it back to our ability to adapt and be resilient to climate change, our ecosystem, especially the Puget Sound and all of the algae and kelp and wildlife that lives in our waters that is affected by that pollution, they all help sequester carbon as well. And they're part of our resilience as a community to the impacts of climate change. And having healthy ecosystems helps keep our communities safe as well, our human communities from things like the impacts of storms and just in general, our ability to continue sequestering carbon that we are putting out into the atmosphere. And if we're talking about drawing down that emission level or just our carbon dioxide levels over time, already our oceans are a huge buffer there. They are already drawing lots of carbon, and we want to continue sequester carbon that way. And so I think, it's not just a side benefit, it's also that like that pollution directly impacts the health of our ecosystems, and we need healthy ecosystems in order to be resilient and adaptable to climate change.
If I could jump, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna, in the climate change world, if they like thinking about ocean acidification as something and sea level rise, like those are extra parts, and also just the occurrence of the more extreme weather events. So like the heat wave that happened last summer also coincided with a really low tide. Was, you maybe heard in the news, billions of sea creature life lost in that. And so kind of adding that to the like, it's a really big picture, and a whole suite of things is impacted by it. So go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I was just wanted to add on to that idea, which is, planners' love of that interrelatedness of decisions. That oftentimes when we think about resilience, we really encourage areas to think about, some people refer to the 15-minute neighborhood, essentially, what would you do if, the power's out, you couldn't get gas for your car, some of the shortages like we had during COVID, like how would those types of different impacts affect your behavior? And if you have more things within walking distance, then you're more resilient, because then you're not dependent upon either the bus or your car to be able to drive to Costco, but you could maybe walk if you have to be able to get to it. And it turns out that, well, like walking is also better for your health. It reduces pollution, it reduces the stormwater impacts. So a lot of those things do interrelate. In some ways, this makes your job really complicated, because you could pursue climate change down so many different paths. But the beauty of it is also that just doing like good planning for your community and thinking about having resources and schools and transportation in a way that makes your community work better is also in some ways the golden solution as well.
Awesome. Carl.
Yeah, speaking about regional fixes or regional, not fixes, but solutions, I guess. I'm really interested in what Georgina brought up about the Thurston County plan. I didn't realize that I knew they had a plan. I didn't realize it was a collaborative plan. That's a really interesting idea. And I think, a model like that, of course, we don't want to get into this sort of horse trading exercise of who's going to, take on which problem first, that kind of thing. But, from a regional standpoint, it seems like that would be a potentially a good model or a good way, good direction, and definitely something that I think we should explore. I really appreciate that Puget Sound Regional Council is doing all the work that you guys are doing. And I think, those resources are going to be really, really valuable for us, as well as, what Pierce County is already working on. But I just wonder, in maybe Kyla or Crystal or anybody, has that discussion come up, something like that, some model? Maybe you touched on it earlier, Kyla, but if you could elaborate again, I'd really love to hear about that.
Yeah, I guess I can share. I know, so we have a sustainability 2030 plan that's countywide, a countywide plan to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030. And you could say it's kind of like our county climate action plan, but right now we don't have cities and towns that have adopted it with us. City of Tacoma has their own climate action plan, and that has been kind of the way it has played out, is that like individual cities have done their own kind of planning. And but there is a couple of models. One is Thurston County's model of doing a kind of collaboratively planned, I don't know, that's a poor way to say that, but it's a collaborative plan, right, across different jurisdictions. The other kind of model that we've seen is King County has their own King County climate action plan, and then they have a program called K4C, which is, and I'm going to totally blank on what it stands for right now, but it's a way for any city or town within King County to adopt their own climate action plan based on a model, and they all kind of fit together and align with the King County climate action plan. So those are kind of two different ways we've seen other local counties do this. And it's certainly on the table for us to discuss with, as we kind of update Pierce County's Sustainability 2030 plan. Is there a way for cities and towns to adopt similar plans or kind of like sign on to the plan? And that's a discussion that we've started to have a little bit with. We did form as part of our Sustainability 2030 plan, there was an action to develop a collaborative for all the cities and towns and tribes for staff to just come together and talk about sustainability topics and issues and best practices and things like that. And that's something that could evolve into something kind of like K4C's program of everyone who's participating in that collaborative could kind of sign on to the 2030 plan or create their own plan that aligns with it. I think that's really just going to depend on interest from cities and towns. So, we're not going to force anyone to create a climate action plan. It can be like a very, challenging and expensive process depending on how you do it. But we're happy to work on, any kind of toolkit we can to help cities and towns do a climate action plan or create a sustainability plan that is very similar to the 2030 plan. Definitely something that's on the table. We just need to hear that there's a need, that there's an interest.
Great, thank you, Kyla. Crystal.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to also follow up on Carl's question. I think another thing to consider is that because the impacts are so variable, you may find other plans besides the comp plan or sustainability plan, you might find a good place to collaborate. So for example, in Pierce County, the current flood hazard management plan was only for the major rivers of Pierce County, but we're in the process of updating and significantly expanding that plan right now. And so the new plan will include all of the jurisdictions and jurisdictions and flood, like it's around flooding. So flood planners and floodplain administrators across the jurisdictions are participating and providing input in the development and creation of the plan right from the beginning, with hopefully the idea that their jurisdictions will, sign off with this, and adopt it as, this is our plan too. So they don't have to go ahead and create a whole new plan. And the connection to climate changes, especially related to flooding, is for Gig Harbor would be sea level rise. Obviously you're on the water, that's going to be a big impact. And so we're addressing sea level rise in our flood plan. And as well as groundwater and riverine flooding as well too, and that impact of climate change. So that's kind of another example, but there is a local model where we're trying to all work together across jurisdictions to produce one plan that we are all supporting.
All right, Barbara.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that this will be kind of one of the decisions that need to be made, is how to integrate these decisions into our usual organizational and planning structures. The webinar that I went to on Monday, there was a lot of discussion about whether to integrate these concepts into the comp plan, or a lot of folks integrate them into their hazard mitigation plans. And then if they're integrating it into your comp plan, are you doing it as like its own chapter? Or are you integrating it into everything? And the one thing that was kind of interesting is, I think it was City of Redmond was talking about that, is they put it in their comp plan. They didn't create a separate chapter. They just kind of integrated it into the whole thing, but they're using it as sort of a starting point that they're continuing to take that justification, those policies, and implement them through other plans like parks plans and transportation plans. So there's some organizational stuff that'll need to be sorted in terms of figuring out how to integrate all these different decisions and policies.
Yeah, of course. I know we're gonna lose Kelly and maybe Paul in like 5 minutes. So if you have any final questions for them, you know, ask now or forever hold your breath.
I'm just going to say thanks. I think it's been great that you were able to come and explain this myself. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, any final thoughts before I talk about homework? Okay,
You're
y'all
gonna
ready
lose
for
a bunch of
homework?
people, Roxy, if you start talking about homework, you're gonna see it's gonna be dropping like flies here on the squares.
I know, I don't have you like trapped in a traditional meeting room. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation and kind of like in the program overview, you know, we're moving towards a comprehensive plan amendment. Climate change was apparently removed from our comprehensive plan in 2018. So we want to add it back in a meaningful way. And I need your help because I'm only one person and I don't have that many ideas. So over the next few weeks, our next meeting is July, I think 13th. I would like you before the next meeting, so you have a couple weeks, to email me 2 goals or policies you would like to see in the comp plan related to today's topic, which is, you know, regional collaboration. I know we talked a lot about greenhouse gas inventory, but the point of this meeting was to talk about regional collaboration and regional strategies. So yeah, I can send out an email reminder when I get back from vacation on the 21st, but I will be bugging you for your homeworks, but please keep that in mind and please try and get to me before you forget inevitably 5 minutes after this meeting is over. Okay, looks like we had a lot of questions about the homework. Is that what all this is about? Go ahead, Carl.
I just wanted to correct, the next meeting is going to be June 22nd, so the day after you get back. So we'll be, Roxy and I will be collaborating on pulling everything together for that meeting when she's back. But so I guess I was going to say, if you could just make sure and copy me as well on any of that stuff that goes to Roxy, and then I can kind of work on it and have it ready for when she gets back, so she's not completely in the dark. That'd be great.
Thanks, Carl.
You bet.
Sorry about that mix-up. June 22nd.
Can you repeat the homework one more? Email 2 policies.
2 goals or policies related to regional collaboration or partnerships that you would like to see in our comp plan amendment. All right, Roger.
So for those of us that aren't planners, I'm just a humble engineer. Can you give me an example of what you might mean on that? I'm usually focused on some one thing, so I can give you like a ton of things, but this sounds a little broader for my skill set. So
yeah, and
give me some examples so I can focus in.
Kelly and Paul, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you longer than you need to because I know you have another meeting. So thank you so much. And if you need to go while we talk about homework, totally get it. Thank you so much.
Take advantage. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks for inviting me, Roxy. I will make one suggestion, and that's it. As people think about policies and goals, well, of course, we have some policies and goals in Vision 2050. You can look at those, and there are some other great examples on the MRSC.org website of other communities' goals and policies.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Paul.
To address, your question, Roger, you can look at our current comprehensive plan, and usually the goals are pretty broad. So it can be something like reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And if you want to put something concrete in there, you can. But these are kind of, the comp plan is good for 6 years. So these are things that can be played out over kind of a longer period of time. They're going to shape the direction of city policy. So we can't really adopt anything that isn't in the comp plan.
Roxy, could I offer a suggestion
Yes.
that maybe we send out, we could send out some examples,
Mhm.
Roger, of what we're kind of
Yeah.
talking about? That might be a good way to go. And then, and not just relative to climate change, but just a slew of examples to the group, and just kind of give you the flavor for what Roxy's looking for. That might be useful.
Yeah, that'll help a lot. I just want to be as useful as I can for you guys. And if I know how you think and what things that you look for, then I can then meld my thoughts into that. Make it easy.
Great. We'll do that.
Thanks, Carl. Okay. Carl, did you have another question or comment, or your hand's just raised? Okay, it's okay. Paul.
So kind of to follow up to Roger's question, because I absolutely haven't, dealt with this type of thing before, but since we're talking about regional collaboration and consistency and all that, has the city looked at Pierce County's plan or Kitsap County's plan to just utilize whatever we can out of that as a baseline? So
I have started to look at climate action plans, but I will say that talking about a climate action plan specifically is a little bit outside of the scope of what we're doing here. The climate action plan will likely have its own set of like analyses and goals associated with it that can like end up in a climate specific comp plan amendment, or in a comp plan amendment down the road, because like likely we won't get a climate action plan done before the legislative process would need to start this year for a comp plan amendment.
So looking at their comprehensive plans.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
I would add, Pierce County is also working on integrating climate change into our comprehensive plan. Is also not currently in there. So
okay,
there isn't an example, at least on the Pierce County side, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other local jurisdictions in the region that do have climate change already in their comp plan that might have good examples.
Gotcha. Thank you, Paul and Kyla. I'll find some examples to send out before the end of the day to help you all out. Robert?
City of Lakewood and City of Edmonds have addressed comprehensive plans for climate change. And they've got some pretty good goals to jog our memories or get our thinking going. I'd recommend those as a place to start. And a larger issue though, now we're talking climate change, but we've been talking a lot more than climate change in this discussion. We've been talking sustainability writ large, I think. Are we gonna refine this to climate change, or are we gonna define climate change to be all the above? I'm a little bit confused here.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what definitions of climate change and sustainability you're working with. I think that is a larger conversation that can be addressed in the climate action plan itself, or maybe because I think sometimes when we talk about sustainability, mitigation, resilience, it's kind of a little bit of the same things, kind of like, how do we make sure that future generations have an earth? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Well, it seems to me climate change is primarily directed at greenhouse gas emissions. Unless I'm wrong, because it's all about how much carbon is going into the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about other things, stormwater, forest protect canopy, things like that. You could define that to be part of climate change because that's where you sequester carbon.
Mm-hmm.
But
not wrong.
Just kind of throwing out to the group, are we going to define this broadly? Because Edmonds calls it sustainability. Lakewood calls it climate change. So I just want to find a common place to be.
Yeah, given that we have 2 minutes left in this meeting, I do not want to start a semantic debate because those can get really in the weeds. For the purposes of like what we're doing here, I think we should consider them interchangeable. If you're all right with that, because climate change is a phenomenon that is happening, and kind of tailoring our anthropogenic processes to make a more sustainable process or world to live in to mitigate climate change. They're all kind of intertwined. So I really don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but I appreciate that there may be a distinction there.
Okay.
Okay, and with that, unless anybody has like anything burning, I am going to be on vacation for the next 10 or so days, so I'll be back on the 21st. You can send me emails or drop resources in the box link that I sent out. But Carl will be your point of contact. Not that he needs anything else to do through the 20th. All right. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you so much for your participation. I will be in touch nagging you for your homework. Right.
Thank you.
Have fun on vacation.
Yeah,
Thank
have
you.
fun.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.